Shabbat Shalom. So you might well be familiar with the story of the would-be convert who came to Hillel and he said, I want to convert on condition that you teach me the whole Torah while I stand on one foot, right? And Hillel said, what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. All the rest is commentary. Go and study. But what most people don't necessarily know is that that's a part of a series of would-be converts who went first to Shammai and then to Hillel. And there was another guy actually before this one who was listening to this Parashat being read, and the description of the clothing and all that the high priest had, and he thought, sounds pretty good. I like that. So he went to Hillel. Well, he went first to Shammai and then to Hillel, and said, I'll convert to Judaism on condition that I become the high priest. Okay, as somebody who is both a Kohen and who loves the TV show The Pit, but finds myself going like this for about half of it. I don't know. I personally don't know why anybody would have wanted to be the high priest. Cool clothing notwithstanding, but he did. At any rate. There are a couple times in this parasha, and they're actually appear close together. There's one verse where it says that the high priest on the hem of his robe has a row of bells. Okay, and then a few verses later, it says that any Kohen who is performing sacrifices has to wear linen pants. Okay? And in both cases, it says that the high priest should have the row of bells, velo yamut, so he not die. Okay? And then the linen pants also lo yamutu, so that they not die. And the question is, how does a row of bells on the bottom of your robe or linen pants prevent you from dying? Okay, and a lot of commentators have difficulty with this. Rashi explains, because this is the rules that God gave, and you follow the rules, and you don't get killed. You don't follow the rules, and you do get killed, right? And in Leviticus, right, we see that Nadav and Avihu, the two older sons of Aaron, they go into the Holy of Holies unbidden and perform unauthorized rituals, and what happens? They die. Okay, so this is like serious stuff, but a lot of commentators also point out that there's a practical reason for the bells, right? Why? So only the Kohen Gadol is allowed in the Holy of Holies, right? So the Kohen Gadol goes in and he's doing his stuff, and everybody hears the bells, right? And if they don't hear the bells, something's happened to the Kohen Gadol, right? And sometimes it's actually the absence of sound that can give you a hint that something is wrong, right? Like in the winter, I mean, if takes a while, maybe a couple of hours have passed, and I don't hear the furnace, serves, right? So sometimes the absence of sound lets you know that something is wrong, right? So here, if the Kohen Gadol, something happens to him, God forbid, either he dies or falls ill, or we don't hear the bell, so we know that something has happened. Yeah, you better hear that.
In a practical everyday sense, I remember being the oldest of 4 children, and my mother saying to me, "Too quiet upstairs," because it was coming on.
Right, exactly, right? I mean, if the kids are not making noise, they're probably up to something, right? But, so, all right, so the Kohen Gadol, the bells stop. There's an issue with the Kohen Gadol. We still have a problem, right? Because you can't enter the Holy of Holies, right? So the Mishnah tells us that, not a string, a rope, that the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, had a rope tied around his leg, so that if he fell ill or died, but you got to be practical, right? If he fell ill or died, they could pull him out, right? Because otherwise, right? I mean, all right, not to compare, right? But something dies in the wall of your house, and you can't get it out, right? That is a problem, right? The Kohen Gadol dies in the Holy of Holies, right? And anybody who goes in to get him out also dies. So we're going to have a trail of corpses until, right? You can't. So, practical, right? Practical, but the point is that in the Torah, this worship is serious business, right? It's serious business, and sometimes, like the death of Nadav and Avihu was an incredibly traumatic event, right? It's something that we actually still talk about and try to understand why it happened and what the significance is. And it also caused a lot of tension between Aaron and Moses, right? And worship should not be traumatic, but sometimes it is. In 1985, and I would say the summer of 1985, except where I was, it was actually the winter of 1985. I had an internship in Sydney from July through the end of the high holidays. And on Rosh Hashanah, I come to shul, and there are police standing outside the shul with machine guns, right? And I'm saying, right, I'd never seen, right, armed police guarding a shul before, but there in Sydney, it was. And so my response at the time was, wow, it's really different in Sydney than it is back home in the States. Not anymore, right? Not anymore. Although, again, I mean, what happened on Hanukkah in Bondi Beach? And I actually lived in Bondi when I had that internship, okay? And we here in the States never experienced, physical attacks on synagogue till 2018, right? The Tree of Life massacre, and then came Poway, and then Colliesville, right? And it changed the way we do things, right? And in Colliesville, actually, I mean, in my opinion, the rabbi wasn't so smart, right? Because the door was locked, and a person who, he should have been wary about, but rabbi let him in, okay? But think about how different things are, right? I mean, for the first 8-9 years that I was the rabbi here, Saturday morning I came and I opened up the building by myself, and the front door is unlocked, and I'm in the building by myself, mostly doing what I gotta do with my back to those doors, right? And I would not do that now, right? I would not do that now. And now on Shabbat morning, when we open the building, there's 3, sometimes 4 people here, right? This morning actually 5, right? Brian and Lauren and me and Jose and the security guard, right? We have changed the way that we do things. And so, in sort of doing research for my talk this morning, so how much money do you think that the American Jewish community spends on security each year? Okay, combined, all of the synagogues and the day schools and the JCCs and whatever total spending on security of the American Jewish community. Anyone want to hazard a guess?
Billions.
You say billions, you say millions?
250 million.
What?
250 million.
250 million. 250 million times 3 plus a little more. Okay? No way of knowing for sure. Okay? But the Jewish Federations of North America estimate that the American Jewish community spends $765 million a year on security, okay? And that the average Jewish organization spends 14% of its budget on security, okay? And day schools, an average of $807 per pupil on security.
I challenge someone to get into JDS without an ID. Seriously.
Right, you challenge, right, and that's the way it should be, right? That's the way it should be. And
there was a major security breach at JDS a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
okay.
They completely changed everything.
They revamped the security.
They completely revamped the security. And by the way, I mean, some of these things are not unique to day schools. I mean, try to get into Watkins Mill High School without ID, right? I mean, you can't do that either. And I mean, I don't know how many of you saw this, right? But MCPS just sent a memo, the superintendent, to all elected officials in the county. You can't just show up at the schools and walk in, right? You got to make an appointment. Let us know you're coming. So some of these things, it's not just us, but still, it's an extraordinary amount of money, right? And people are used to our professions changing, right? But my first job out of college, I was a typesetter for magazines and newspapers, right? Which is a profession that does not anymore exist, right? And the amount of my time, and not just me, every rabbi, right, dealing with security, dealing with technology, right? Two subjects that I did not study in rabbinical school, right? And about 5 years ago, every rabbi in the country suddenly had to become an expert on what? Epidemiology, right? And, I still get questions, not frequently, but I still, this thing and this thing and this thing happened, can I still come to shul? Right? What do I know? I mean, but we spend a lot of time doing stuff that we didn't train for and have no particular expertise, right? But, so Aaron had his bells, right? And we have alarms and panic buttons and cameras, right? And the 910 club, right? Things, I don't know, maybe I should get bells too, but what? All the bells and whistles, right? All the bells, right? But things change and there are practical concerns, and we are still, I think we are a people suffering from a lot of trauma, right? We have the trauma of the rise of anti-Semitism. We have the trauma of physical insecurity, and we still have, the trauma of the Holocaust. That is a generational trauma, right? And things happen, and they remind us of other things, right? Not necessarily things that happened to me personally, but that happened to people that I know and love and care about. And anybody who has ever been in therapy, which frankly I really hope is every person in this room, because it's important. It is, right? But you cannot heal from trauma until you acknowledge the trauma, right? That is the first step. And we are, just like our ancestors were traumatized by the death of Nadav and Avihu, we are traumatized by many things that have happened in our society and in our world, and sometimes, why did I just do that? Right? Why did I? And the answer is dealing with trauma. And prayer should not be an occasion for trauma, but the reality is that's the reality. And we have to recognize it before we can deal with it. Shabbat Shalom.